March 29th, 1461. The wind-swept moors of Towton, Yorkshire, England. A bitter chill bites through chainmail and woolen gambesons, as dawn struggles to pierce the veil of swirling snow. You stand amid the Yorkist host, your boots sinking into the frost-crusted earth, the metallic tang of fear and frost mingling in the air. Around you, 28,000 souls, archers with longbows strung taut, billmen gripping ash-hafted weapons slick with dew, knights in dented plate armor stamping their feet against the cold form a ragged line that stretches like a serpent across the Cockbeck Valley. The river below rushes swollen with its icy fingers clutching at the banks as if to drag the unwary into oblivion. Edward of York, barely 19, towers at the vanguard on his desk, a massive black beast whose breath plumes like dragon fire in the gloom. His face, boyish yet etched with the steel of inheritance, is framed by a sallet helm chased with golden lions. He raises a gauntlet fist, and the banners snap awake York's white rose, unfurling against the slate-grey sky. A defiant bloom in a world gone white. For God and King Edward, his voice booms, raw and unyielding, carrying over the low rumble of shifting feet and the distant, ominous thunder of hooves from across the valley. Opposite, the Lancastrian army mirrors your own in scale, but swells with grim resolve. Another 28,000, their red roses pinned like blood drops to surcoats sodden with sleet. Henry Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, commands from a low rise, his banner of the bleeding heart whipping wildly. Beside him, the exiled Henry Percy, Earl of Northumberland, snarls orders to his border reavers hardened raiders from the Scottish marches, their faces scarred and feral under fur-trimmed hoods. The air thickens with the creak of yew-boughs bending, the clink of poleaxes being shouldered, and the muttered prayers to saints long forgotten in the heat of vendetta. A horn wails from the Lancastrian Linzer, guttural blast from a curving ox-horn, echoing off the hills like the cry of some ancient beast. It is the signal. You feel it before you see it. The sky darkens further as a storm of arrows rises, a black cloud blotting the feeble sun. 300 yards away, they arc, graceful and lethal, feathered shafts glinting like obsidian thorns. Shields up, bellows a grizzled sergeant at arms beside you, his voice cracking like dry timber. You huddle behind your pavus, a towering oak shield bossed with iron, as the first volley hammers down. Thuds like war drums' arrows, punching through wicker and flesh, splintering bone. A man to your left crumples without a sound. A yard of bodkin-tipped death protruding from his throat, his life's blood steaming on the snow. The Yorkists answer in kind. Edward's archers loose their own tempest. Longbows each, a 6-foot arc of yew, heartwood, drawn to the ear with hemp strings humming like harp wires, propelling broadheads at a rate of 10 shafts a minute. The air fills with the whip-crack of releases, the hiss of flight, and the wet smacks of impacts. Across the field, Red Rose knights reel in their saddles, horses screaming as arrows lodge in barding and withers. Somerset's vanguard buckles, 100 men felled in the opening exchange, their bodies twisting into the mud like discarded puppets. But the Lancastrians press, their centre surging forward in a disciplined wedge of pikes and bills. You glimpse the face of a young esquire, no older than Edward himself, his tabard emblazoned with the Stafford knot, charging with a falchion raised high. The ground trembles under the thunder of their advance. A human tide crashing against the Yorkist palisade of stakes and shields. Collision comes like the clash of forge hammers. Steel on steel, screams on screams. Your billhook bites into a foe's pauldron, the impact jarring up your arms as rivets shear and mail rings part. He falls, gurgling, but another takes his place, a brawny man-at-arms with a poleaxe, its spiked head whistling as it descends. Edward is everywhere and nowhere, a whirlwind of silver and fury. His great sword, joyous guard, carves arcs through the melee, severing limbs and shattering helms. Blood sprays in crimson arcs, freezing in mid-air to fleck the snow with ruby jewels. Push them back. To the river, he roars, his destrier rearing to trample a cluster of Lancastrian archers. The beast's iron-shod hooves pulp flesh and bone, leaving a churned slurry of awful and earth. Hours bleed into eternity under that merciless sky. The Cockbeck runs red, choked with corpses, until it overflows its banks, turning the ford into a slaughter pit. Men drown in shallows no deeper than a man's knee. Weighed down by armor and desperation, their hands clawing at the slippery banks as comrades trample over them. The wind shifts, carrying the reek of voided boughs and seared flesh from cauterized wounds. By midday, the Lancastrian left flank shatters under Northumberland's faltering charges. Reivers, brave but outmatched, break and flee toward Saxton village, pursued by Yorkist hounds baying for vengeance. Yet Somerset rallies his corps, a knot of desperate nobility around the royal standard, the antelope of Henry VI, limp and muddied. They fight like cornered wolves, poleaxes hooking at knees and groins, daggers plunging into visor slits. You see a knight of the king's household, Sir Andrew Trollope, his beard matted with gore, felling 3 Yorkists with sweeps of his partisan before a crossbow bolt punches through his gore, blooming scarlet across his chest as the sun dips toward the horizon. Painting the carnage in bruised purples, Edward's host surges triumphant. The Lancastrian remnants scatter into the gathering dusk, leaving 28,000 of their own staining the field's bodies piled in drifts higher than a mounted man's head. The snow long since surrendered to a vast, steaming mire. You slump against your shield, breath ragged, hands numb around a haft slick with drying blood. The white rose flies unchallenged now, but in the quiet aftermath, as crows wheel overhead and the wind moans through the banners, you know this is no end. It is a gasp in the storm. The roots of this apocalypse twist back through decades, into the shadowed halls of Westminster and the blood-soaked nurseries of noble houses. To understand Towton, one must trace the thorns that birthed these roses back to the fractious reign of Henry VI, a king more monk than monarch, whose pious frailties invited the wolves of ambition to the throne. It begins in the summer of 1422, under the vaulted arches of Windsor Castle, where the air hangs heavy with the scent of beeswax candles and the faint rot of unburied grudges. Henry VI, a boy of 9 months, is crowned in his father's stead. The great Henry V, conqueror of Agincourt cold in a French grave, his dream of empire crumbling like dry mortar. The infant king's regents, led by his uncles, scramble to hold the fractured realm. England reels from plague and famine, while across the Channel, French rebels gnaw at the heels of English garrisons. Young Henry grows not into a warrior, but a dreamer. By his majority in 1437, at 16, he is pious to the point of paralysis, spending hours in prayer, his slender frame draped in velvet robes, while advisers like William de la Pole, Duke of Suffolk, whisper schemes into his ear. Suffolk, a silver-tongued courtier with a taste for fine Burgundian wines, marries his ward, the 15-year-old Margaret of Anjou, to Henry in a union sealed at the Cathedral of Trier. Margaret arrives in April 1445, a fiery Provençal beauty with raven hair and a will forged in the courts of intrigue. Her dowry a phantom promise of peace with France. But peace unravels like a poorly spun thread. Suffolk's bungled diplomacy cedes main to the French, igniting fury among the martial nobility. In 1450, as riots erupt in London, mobs hurling dung and cries of Jack Cade's rebellion. Echoing through Cheapside, Suffolk is impeached. Dragged to the Tower, he pens a desperate plea. "Alas, my lord, what shall become of me?" His answer comes at sea, beheaded by Kentish rebels, his head pitched into the Solent like a traitor's offering. Margaret, now queen, steps into the void with the ferocity of a she. Pregnant with the future Edward of Westminster, she navigates a court seething with Yorkist whispers. Richard, Duke of York, descended from Edward III through both son and daughter. His claim, a labyrinth of Plantagenet blood, grows restless in his Irish lordship. Tall and scholarly, with a scholar's beard and a soldier's scars from French campaigns, York returns in 1450, demanding the protectorate. Henry, lost in Catatonia after a collapse at Clarendon, yields, but Margaret, ever vigilant, sees York not as saviour, but serpent. The first blood spills in 1452 at St Albans, a market town drowsing under May skies. York's meagre force 2,000 against the king's 3 clashes in the narrow streets. Butchers, hooks, and apprentices' staffs joining the fray alongside swords. The royalists shatter. Somerset flees into a tanner's shop, dragged out and slain, his head spiked on a lance. York spares the king, kneeling in feigned loyalty. But the rift yawns wider. By 1455, the abbey's cloisters run red again. Henry, roused from his stupor, leads a new host against York at the Second Battle of St. Albans, this time Warwick the Kingmaker, Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, York's nephew, a bear of a man with a penchant for falconry, and fast ship turns the tide. His archers rain death from the hedgerows, felling the royal guard. Henry cowers in a draper's shop, his crown tumbling into the dust, while Margaret flees north with her son, the boy prince clutching a wooden sword carved like Excalibur. York seizes the throne's shadow, installing himself as protector once more. But the Queen's partisans harry from the Welsh marches, where her uncle, the hot-tempered Owen Tudor, rallies Lancastrian diehards. In December 1460, at Wakefield, the Duke's hubris meets its match. Lured from Sandal Castle by false parleys, York faces a Lancastrian ambush in the snow-dusted parklands. Clifford the Butcher, Henry Clifford, Lord of Westmoreland, his eyes hollow with the loss of his father at St Albans, claims the Duke's head, parading it, mockingly crowned with paper from a local scrivener, fixed above Sandal's gates. Word reaches Edward at Mortimer's Cross, where he stands with his brothers George, the golden-haired schemer, and Richard, the slight youth with a hunch to his shoulder that belies his ruthless core. A solar eclipse darkens the sky, omens swirling like the gathering storm clouds. Let the sun rise in blood, Edward declares, and marches north. His White Rose army swelling with the dispossessed. Now, back on Towton's field, as the last echoes of battle fade, Edward claims his father's vengeance. Henry VI wanders, lost in Northumberland's towers, a ghost king whispering to shadows. Margaret and her son flee to Scotland, her French accents sharpening with resolve. The throne gleams within grasp, but betrayal's thorns twist deeper still, brothers against brothers. Roses entwined in eternal war. June 28, 1461. The Great Hall of Westminster Abbey, London. Sunlight shafts through stained-glass saints, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the throng of velvet-clad nobles, their murmurs a susurrus like wind through oak leaves. Incense curls from golden censers, heavy with myrrh and the undercurrent of ambition's musk. You press forward in the crush, your plain woolen doublet chafing against sweat-damp skin. Elbowed by liveried retainers bearing trays of Rhenish wine and marchpane confections, shaped like heraldic beasts. The air thrums with the low chant of monks, their Latin invocations, weaving a fragile spell over the assembly. At the high altar, Edward of York kneels, his broad shoulders straining the seams of a crimson mantle furred with ermine, the white rose brooch at his throat glinting like a shard of ice. No longer the boy of Towton, he is 20 now, his frame, hardened by war into a colossus of sinew and resolve 6'4" of unyielding Plantagenet vigor. His golden hair cropped close beneath the circlet of state. Archbishop Boucher anoints him with chrism oil, the sacred chrism dripping like liquid gold onto his bowed head, while trumpets peal from the triforium, their brazen notes scattering pigeons from the rafters. Edward, by the grace of God, King of England and France, Lord of Ireland, intones the prelate, his voice echoing off the Norman vaults. The crown St. Edward's, heavy with sapphires, and the ghosts of conquerors settles upon the new monarch's brow, and a roar erupts from the hall, crashing like a breaker on Dover's cliffs. But even in this apex of triumph, shadows lengthen. Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, the Kingmaker, they whisper now. His influence, a web spun from Calais smugglers' galleys and Welsh border keep, stands at Edward's right hand. His face a mask of avuncular pride, eyes sharp as a falcon's under beetled brows, tall and barrel-chested, with a russet beard streaked grey from ceaseless scheming. Warwick has bankrolled this coronation with his vast Neville patrimony, 500 retainers in blue and gold livery, their badges of the ragged staff sewn like threats into every sleeve. He clasps Edward's arm in the aftermath, murmuring counsel over the din of toasts, secure the north, my king, lest Margaret's vipers slither south. His breath redolent of mumsy and the salt of private doubts. Edward's reign dawns in a blaze of chivalric pomp, but the roses' war simmers beneath the surface, a cauldron bubbling in the misty fells of the Scottish border. Margaret of Anjou, exiled queen, paces the draughty halls of Linlithgow Palace, her son Edward at her side, a pale boy of 8, his dark curls framing a face too solemn for innocence. Schooled in dagger play and the litanies of Lancastrian right, Scottish allies, bought with promises of Cheviot wool and Cumberland iron, muster under the Earl of Douglas, a kilted giant with a claymore scarred from Otterburn's fields. From her perch, Margaret dispatches ravens to Jasper, Tudor in Wales, half-brother to the imprisoned Henry V's queen. His Welsh longbowmen, a thorn in Yorkist flank sand, to the remnants of Clifford's wild hillmen, who haunt the dales like wraiths, ambushing supply trains with hornbows and boar spears. Word of plots reaches Edward in the Privy Chamber of Westminster, where tapestries of Arthurian hunts flap in the hearth's updraft. Treason brews in the heather, warns his brother George, Duke of Clarence, lounging on a carved settle with a goblet of Hippocras, his pretty lips curling in disdain. George, ever the peacock in violet silks, nurses grievances against Warwick's dominance, his affections as fickle as April rains. Richard, the youngest brother, broods by the casement, his slight form hunched at the shoulder from a fall in childhood, cloaked in sober black, fingers drumming a dirk's hilt. Let me lead the host north, brother, he urges, voice soft but edged like Toledo steel. I'll scour them from the moors. Edward demurs at first, wedding Warwick's daughter, Isabel, in a bid for unity. The ceremony at the bishop's palace, a whirl of lutes and embroidered samite, but by autumn, the north erupts. Lancastrian raiders, under Lord Wells, veteran of Towton's slaughter, his beard grizzled white torch Yorkist manors in Lincolnshire, their torches blooming like hellflowers against the harvest stubble. Edward rides out from Nottingham Castle, 5,000 strong, men-at-arms in sallets crested with falcon feathers, demolancers with barded roundseys snorting steam, and Warwick's cannon-crewed serpentine guns, their barrels forged in Berwick smith, belching smoke and iron balls that rend oak palisades like parchment. The clash comes at Stamford Heath. On March 12, 1462, under a sky bruised with thunder, you ride in Edward's rear guard, the ground sucking at your charger's fetlocks, the air acrid with powder flash and the green tang of trampled meadow sweet. Wells force 8,000 levies, their bills sheathed in oiled leather deploys, in a boar-snout formation behind earthen breastworks, caltrops glinting like viper teeth in the grass. Horns blare from the Yorkist van, and the charge rolls forward, hooves pounding like war drums, lances couched under arms, banners of the sun in splendour whipping overhead. Cannonade shatters the morning. Warwick's gunners, sweat-streaked apprentices from the Tower armoury, touch off linstocks to the touch-holes. The reports crack like God's own thunder, flinging grapeshot that scythes down a swath of Lancastrian billmen, their bodies tumbling in sprays of crimson mist. You spur forward as the lines meet, your sword, a baselid, with a staghorn, grip rising and falling in the crush. A rebel knight, his visor raised to reveal a face pocked with old ague, lunges with a mace. You parry the blow, numbing your wrist, then riposte low, the blade biting through cuisse and tendon. He topples, cursing in guttural dialect, as your comrades swarm past, poleaxes hooking at helms and gorgets. Wells fights like a cornered badger, his standard a silver well bucket on azure wavering amid the melee, but numbers tell. By vespers, his host fractures, fleeing into the fens, where Yorkist bloodhounds, great mastiffs, loosed from leashes bay through the reeds. 2,000 Lancastrians litter the field, their wounds cauterized by hasty brands, the moans rising like a dirge over the carrion crows. Edward, bloodied but unbowed, his greythorn dented from a glancing poleaxe, claims the day. The red rose wilts, he proclaims to the cheering ranks, hoisting Wells' severed head on a pike, its eyes pecked blind by dusk. Yet victory sows deeper discord. Warwick, chafing at Edward's growing independence, withdraws to Middleham Castle, his letters laced with veiled barbs. There, in the shadowed solar, hung with tapestries of Trojan wars, he pores over missives from France. Louis XI, the Spider King, offering gold for Lancastrian restoration, his envoys slipping across the channel in herring boats. Edward, sensing the rift, turns to his secret vice. In the mulled wine haze of a London tavern, he beds Elizabeth Woodville, a widow of striking beauty, her golden hair unbound, lips tasting of clove and widow's resolve, their tryst whispered in alcoves where rushes crunch under furtive feet, blooms into passion. By May 1464, she stands before him in the Queen's Bower, demanding marriage as the price of her honour. Edward weds her in secrecy at Grafton Regis, the chapel's bells muffled by fog off the Naney. Elizabeth's kinder upstart, Woodville's, her father a mere knight, her brothers brawny but bookish warm, the court like bees to honey. Warwick, apprised by a spurned groom's jibe, feels the sting deepest. His match for Edwarda, French princess, brokered for continental alliance, lies in tatters. The king beds a sorceress, he snarls to his brother Montague in the armoury at Warwick Castle, honing a partisan's edge on a whetstone that sparks like falling stars. Betrayal fest. By 1469, the Kingmaker's patience snaps. It erupts in the summer heat of Edgecote Field. Near Banbury, July 26, Warwick's Neville hosts 15,000, bolstered by disgruntled Percys and Oxford's scholar soldiers, ambushes Edward's smaller force under the Earl of Pembroke, Elizabeth's brother. You witness the rout from a hazel thicket, heart-pounding as dawn gilds the dew-slick grass. Pembroke's Welsh spearmen, their coracles hide stretched over you, frames forgotten in the fury. form a schiltron of levelled pikes, but Warwick's cannon their breeches packed with musket balls erupt from the ridge, the blasts shattering the circle like glass. Men scream as iron hail shreds gambesons, limbs cartwheeling into the undergrowth. The melee devolves into butchery. Montague's billmen, faces blackened with woad like ancient Picts, hack through the Yorkist centre. Heads roll into the Cherwell, bobbing like rotten apples. Pembroke falls, his gorget rent by a Lochaber axe, his blood mingling with the stream's peaty flow. News reaches Edward at Nottingham, a rider's foam-flecked horse collapsing at the gates. The Kingmaker, sire your brother Rivers taken, to be strung from a gibbet at Cheapside. Edward rallies, but the north slips from his grasp. Henry VI, the lost king, is plucked from the Tower by Warwick's agents, dragged from his prayer cell in a monk's cowl. His eyes vacant as winter Ponsand paraded through Manchester as the restored monarch. Margaret watches from Angers, her fingers tracing a map of England veined with rivers of opportunity. Her son's voice piping, "When do we sail for Lancaster's crown, mother?" The roses tangle tighter, thorns drawing fresh blood. Edward flees to Flanders, his ships cutting wakes through the autumn gales. While Warwick crowns the Ghost King at York Minster, the bells tolling like knells for the realm's soul. Brothers Clarence and Richard stand uneasy at the puppet throne, their loyalties fraying like rope in a tempest. The war, far from quelled by Towton's snow, renews in a Nestor cyclone of shifting allegiances, where yesterday's ally becomes tomorrow's noose. April 14th, 1471. The mist-shrouded meadows of Barnet, Hertfordshire, just north of London. Dawn creeps reluctant over the hedgerows, the air thick as curdled milk, swallowing sound and sight alike. You crouch in the Yorkist vanguard, your breath a shallow rasp against the damp wool of your bassinet's liner, the chill seeping through your brigandine like a lover's deceitful caress. Around you, Edward IV's host 12,000 hardened souls, their armour misted with dew-huddles in the gloom. Dismounted men-at-arms with poleaxes shouldered like grim reapers' scythes, archers testing bowstrings slick with condensation, and gunners fussing over falconets, their iron mouths swabbed against the damp. The ground squelches underfoot, a mire of clay and forgotten furrows. The scent of wet earth and horse dung heavy as an unspoken curse. Edward himself stalks the lines on foot, his once golden hair now streaked with the iron of exile's trials, his frame still a tower of unbent resolve, clad in a harness of Milanese plate, chased with a sudden splendour, he grips a poleaxe, whose haft is scarred from a dozen melees. His voice a low growl cutting the fog. Today, we end the Kingmaker's folly. For York, for England hold the line till light breaks. His eyes, blue as Channel steel, scan the vapours where Warwick's army lurks unseen, 15,000, a patchwork of Lancastrian exiles and Neville retainers, their red roses pinned defiantly to surcoats, faded by Channel crossings. Warwick, the once mighty earl, commands from a creaking command post of wagons lashed together, his russet beard unkempt, face gaunt from the gales of his Burgundian refuge. Beside him, his brother Montague John Neville, Marquis of Montague, his loyalty afraid Threadmutter's prayers to a silver crucifix, while Oxford's blue and white badge flutters. Like a false dawn on the left flank, the treachery of the past year hangs like this fog. Warwick's pact with Margaret, sealed in anger's candlelit halls, where French wine flowed and maps unrolled like serpents' skins. He'd wed his daughter Anne to Margaret's son, the boy Prince Edward, in a ceremony reeking of desperation. The Queen's raven tresses bound with pearls of Lancastrian tears. Ships from Honfleur had borne them back in September 1470. Landing at Dartmouth amid equinoctial storms, Warwick's cannons thundering salutes that masked the creak of broken oaths, Edward IV, caught unawares in the Weald, had fled to his brother-in-law's court in Burgundy. Charles the Bold, a duke more boor than bookman, while Warwick restored the spectral Henry VI to the throne, the old king's fingers trembling on the sceptre like autumn leaves. But exile forged Edward anew. From Bruges' frost-rimed wharves he'd scraped a fleet of Burgundian cogs, their holds groaning with Burgundian crossbows and Flemish gunpowder. Landing at Ravenspur on March 12th, he'd marched south like a ghost of Bolingbroke, his white rose unfurling to cries of a York rather than rebellion's roar. Clarence, the fickle duke, had defected back at the Seine's banks, his violet sails joining the Armada, while Richard, now Duke of Gloucester, his hunch a mere shadow to his blade-sharp mind, rode at Edward's side, his boar standard trotting proud. London had opened its gates on the 13th, the Tower's portcullis grinding up to cheers, though Warwick's scouts harried their flanks like hornets from the Chilterns. Now, in Barnet's blind murk, the battle ignites without warning. A single cannon shot cracks from the Lancastrian right. Warwick's gunners, their linstocks glowing like will-o'-the-wisps, misjudging the range in the haze. The iron ball whistles harmlessly into the mist, but it is enough. Edward bellows the charge, and his centre surges, a wall of shields crashing forward, bills thrusting like porcupine quills. You stumble into the fray, the fog parting in rags to reveal phantoms. A Montague man-at-arms, his face a rictus under a barbute, swinging a morning star that whistles past your ear. Your sword meets his in a screech of steel, sparks blooming brief as fireflies. Then you drive your dagger up under his armpit, feeling the grate of mail giving way to the hot gush of life. The lines tangle in chaos, the mist a cruel jest that devours friend and foe alike. Shouts of white rose, white clash with red. Lancaster, in a babel of agony, men slaying kin in the confusion. On the Yorkist left, Oxford's wing led by the Earl of Oxford himself, a bookish knight with a penchant for Italian sonnets and English steel wheels. Unexpectedly, their blue lion banner vanishing into the gloom, only to re-emerge on the Yorkist rear. Panic, ripples, treachery. Oxford turns coat, the cry spreads like foxfire, and Edward's flank buckles. Billman breaking for the hedges, their retreat a tide of flailing limbs and dropped gauntlets. Warwick scents victory, urging his centre forward from the wagon laager, his destrier grey courser from his Calais stables plunging through the melee hooves, churning divots deep as graves. To the Kingcrush, the upstart, he roars, his partisan lancing a Yorkist sergeant, the man's gorget blooming scarlet. Montague presses beside him, his axe hewing a path through the press. But the fog betrays its own. In the swirl, Yorkist archers loose blind volleys, their longbows twanging like harp-strings gone mad, arrows hissing through the vapour to punch into Montague's breastplate. He topples without a cry, his Marquis coronet rolling into the mud. Trampled under iron-shod boots, Edward rallies his corps with raw charisma, wading into the scrum like a Viking reborn. His poleaxe rises and falls in sweeping arcs, the flanged head crumpling helms and splintering shafts. Blood flecks his visor, steaming in the chill. Stand, my lions, the mist lifts, see the sun, and it does. Piecemeal, rays, piercing the canopy to gild the white roses on his banners. Oxford's men, glimpsed at last, realized the error their star badge, embroidered white on white, mistaken for Edward's son in the mercant wheelback. Slamming into Warwick's exposed flank, the Earl's line shatters like frost under sun. His rearguard flees toward the Barnet church spire, pursued by Gloucester's boar squadron. Richard's slight form a blur of vengeful precision, his short sword darting to hamstrings and throats. By noon, the field is a charnel house. The mist burned away to reveal 5,000 dead strewn like autumn windfall gore-soaked surcoats, indistinguishable in the churned slurry. Warwick, unhorsed and afoot, fights his last in a copse of hazels, his back to a gnarled trunk, falchion parrying a half-dozen blades. A Welsh bowman loyal to Edward from the Mortimer marshes looses a cloth-yard shaft at 20 paces. It punches through the Earl's gorget, lifting him backward in a spray of arterial fury. The Kingmaker crumples, his eyes staring sightless at the indifferent sky. The man who crowned kings reduced to carrion for crows. Edward claims the corpse with grim ceremony, stripping the ragged staff badge and draping it over his own harness like a fallen banner. He made me, and now I unmake him, he mutters to Clarence, who nods uneasily, his fingers twitching toward a hidden point. News flies south. Henry VI, the puppet, cowers once more in the Tower, his prayers unanswered echoes in stone. But Margaret sails from Dieppe even now, her fleet a swarm of Angevin racks, the boy prince at her knee reciting litanies of retribution. The red rose, bloodied but unbroken, seeks its final bloom at Tewkesbury's Abbey meadows. There, in the Maygreen vales of Gloucestershire, the roses wore crests to apocalypse. Edward marches west with blistering speed, 20,000 at his heels, demolancers from Kent's Wealds, their horses caparisoned in Yorkist azure, Cornish spearmen under Oxford's reformed banner, their goads tipped with fish, and Gloucester's vanguard, the white boar rampant on silk that snaps like a lash. Margaret's hosts 6,000, the dregs of Lancastrian hope encamps by the Abbey, its Saxon stones a bulwark against despair. The Queen, her beauty sharpened to a blade by loss, directs from a velvet pavilion, her son beside her in half-plate too heavy for his frame, his voice cracking as he vows, "I'll fell the boar myself." Mother, the battle breaks on the 4th, under skies heavy with the promise of rain. You charge in the Yorkist van, the Sevens mist coiling at your ankles. The air, vibrant with the hum of massed longbows draw a thunderous sigh, shafts arcing in black murmurations to harry the Lancastrian Margaret's French mercenaries, their sallets crested with form the centre, pikes a forest of iron-tipped ash. But Edward's canonry baldaquins dragged from Windsor Park spark from the rises, their hail of stones and bolts splintering the hedge of steel. Gaps yon, Gloucester exploits them like a terrier at a rat-hole, his boar knights pouring through to sow chaos, swords rising wet from the press. The Prince Edward fights valiantly in the melee, his courser wheeling amid the crush, a mace clutched white-knuckled, but Clarence's wing envelops him treachery's echo wand, a Flemish bill hooks his stirrup, yanking him down into the morass. Blades converge. Oxford's own kinsman strikes the first blow, a partisan to the shoulder. Then Gloucester's, a dagger to the throat that stills the boy's gasp forever. Margaret, watching from the Abbey walls, collapses in a swoon as word spreads, her screams keening over the din like banshee wails. By eventide, the field falls silent. 4,000 Lancastrians hewn down in the Abbey's shadow bodies piled against the nave like cordwood, the cloisters running with sluices of blood that stain the chapter house flagstones. Somerset, the Duke who survived Towton, meets his end in the sanctuary, dragged from the high altar mid-prayer, his head severed by a Yorkist headsman, the stroke echoing like judgment's gavel. Margaret is taken, her wrists bound with silk from her own pavilion, to be shipped to the Tower's bell tower, a gilded cage for a fallen queen. Edward returns to London in triumph, the streets awash with rose petals, white overwhelming red. Henry VI perishes in the Tower that night, of melancholy, the whispers go. A pillow's smother, or a dagger's kiss, the truth. The Plantagenet bloodline, twisted through generations of Mortimer claims and Beaufort bastards, straightens at last under Yorkist steel. But in the quiet hearths of manor houses, where bards strum lutes to tales of roses, the thorns linger, seeds of Tudor ambition stirring in Welsh mists, where a distant kinsman named Henry dreams of crimson crowns. August 22nd, 1485. The rolling heathlands of Ambion Hill, Leicestershire, England. Dawn's pallid light filters through a canopy of brooding clouds, casting the landscape in shades of slate and sorrow. You kneel in the Yorkist ranks, the damp chill of the dew-soaked turf seeping through your hose, the air laced with the acrid bite of smouldering matchcord from the gunners, slow matches, and the earthy musk of 12,000 men braced for Armageddon. Around you, Richard III's host arrays in ragged splendour, billsmen from the northern shires, their hauberks patched from Towton's leavings, clutching polearms whose heads gleam dully, archers with yew bows warped from Welsh reins, quivers slung low, and the king's own battler corps of 5,000 knights and men-at-arms in plate etched with the white boar. Richard's emblem, snorting defiantly from velvet pavilions, now struck and stowed. The ground undulates like a dragon's spine. Mist coiling in the hollows, where Reader Morbrook murmurs secrets to the reeds. Richard Plantagenet, Duke of Gloucester, and now King these 2 years, paces the forefront on his white charger, blank sangliera, beast armoured in crimson traps embroidered with golden suns. At 32, he is a figure forged in the crucible of fratricide and crown, slight of build, his left shoulder hunched from old wounds, yet his frame thrums with the coiled ferocity of a cornered heart. His helm, a snarling, boar-crested, rests on the saddle-bow, revealing a face pale as parchment, eyes dark and unblinking under a thatch of raven hair, lips twisted in a perpetual half-snarl from the blade that cleft his mouth in youth. Loyal hearts of England, he calls, voice carrying like a clarion over the rustle of banners. The white rose, faded but fierce, snapping beside the boar. This Tudor pretender comes with Welsh rabble and French gold to steal our birthright. Stand with me, and God shall crown our steel. Arrayed against him, 2 miles distant across the heath, Henry Tudor's meagre force 5,000, a mongrel host of French lances, Scottish and Lancastrian exiles clusters like wolves at a fold. Henry himself, Earl of Richmond, 28, and untested in full battle's gale, stands tall on a grey, his surcoat quartered with the red dragon of Cadwallader, and the portcullis of Beaufort, his mother's bastard line. Slender and bookish, with the aquiline nose of his Welsh forebears and Lancastrian blood thin as winter broth. He grips a standard whose dragon writhes in the breeze, his face a mask of borrowed resolve. Beside him rides the turncoat William Stanley, Lord of Staunton, his brother Thomas commanding the van, their 5,000 reinforcements lurking unseen in the copses, badges of the eagle's claw hidden under cloaks. Jasper Tudor, the grizzled uncle who raised Henry in exile's Van's halls, growls orders to his Welsh spearman, their coracles ghosts in their eyes, longbows strung for vengeance. The roots of this endgame burrow deep into the decade's rot. Edward IV's second reign, had bloomed in uneasy peace. Treaties with Burgundy sealed by his sister Margaret's marriage to Charles the Bold. Commerce swelling London's quays with Gascon wine and Flemish cloth. Elizabeth Woodville, the Queen, bore heirs in abundance. Edward, Prince of Wales, a golden lad of 12 by 1483, schooled in tilt yards and Cicero. Richard, Duke of York, his shadow, at 8. But the court festered with Woodville ambition, the Queen's kin. Rivers and Dorset, grasping at treasuries like squirrels at nuts. Their upstart, blood-chafing, old nobility. Edward's death came sudden in April 1483. At Westminster's Privy Chamber, his mighty frame felled by a fever, or perhaps poison's subtle kiss, his last breath, a rasp of my son. Protect him. The boy King Edward V rides toward London from Ludlow Castle, a cavalcade of 80 knights in cloth of gold, his black charger led by his uncle Rivers, the boy's face solemn under a canopy of state. But Gloucester, protector by Will's decree, intercepts at stony Stratford. Treason stirs, nephew, he lies through gritted teeth, clapping irons on Rivers and the Woodville train, dragging them to Pontefract's dungeons where axes fall like judgments. In the Tower's white chamber, the Princes Edward and his brother Richard play at knights with wooden swords, their laughter echoing off the battlements, unaware of the shadows lengthening. Gloucester, in the council at the Star Chamber, hears the whispers. Robert Brakenbury, constable of the Tower, his face stubbled and loyal. The priest, John Sherwood, murmuring of bastard Edward IV's pre-contract to Lady Eleanor Butler, nullifying the Woodville brood. On June 26, in the hushed nave of Westminster Abbey, the Lord's petition, "Be king, my Lord Gloucester, for the realms," will concept with feigned reluctance. Crowned Richard III, on July 6, amid pealing bells and rose-strewn streets, the boar rampant on his robes. But Betrayals' echo rebounds. Henry Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, Gloucester's ally, his proud plume nodding in the coronation procession, turns in the autumn gales. His Welsh marches aflame with Woodville partisans. He rallies at Brecon Castle, his banner of the Stafford not unfurling to cries of "For Edward V." Richard quells the revolt with Winter's blade, Buckingham beheaded at Salisbury, his head on a spike turning black in the frost. The princes, last glimpsed in the Tower's garden, vanish into legend's moorbones in a staircase, whispers of drownings in the Thames, or exile's merciful vale. Across the Irish Sea, Henry Tudor stirs in Brittany's exile, his claim a fragile filament, son of Margaret both. Henry Vy's half-sister, her labour nearly killing her at 13. Penniless and pursued, he flees at Rennes Cathedral, gathering exiles Oxford, fresh from French oubli. The wide villes fleeing Richard's attack. French gold from Louis XI, the universal spider, fills his cot. Ships from Harfleur bear him to Milford Haven on August 7, his landing a whisper up the Welsh valleys, swelling with Owen Tudor's kin and disaffected Yorkists weary of Richard's iron hand. Now, on Boswell's bosky slopes, the armies close, Richard's cannon-crewed saker pieces, their carriages splintered from northern drags belch smoke from the hill crest. Iron balls caroming through Henry's van, splintering pikes and pulping flesh in roiling clouds. You loose with the archers, your longbows hemp-string, singing a shafts plummeting in a grey sleet to rake the Tudor lines, felling a score of Breton mercenaries in their pothelms, their cries a polyglot of despair. The Yorkist charge descends like an avalanche. Gloucester's battle thunders down the slope. Lances splintering on shields, swords hacking in the saddle's sway. Richard leads from the fore, his greatsword, Erindal forged in Damascus, hilt wrapped in boar tusks, cleaving a path, his war cry a boar. Lost in the clangor, Henry's centre buckles, his dragon standard dipping as Oxford's veterans form a hasty hedge of bills, their points a bristle against the onslaught. You wheel into the flank, your mounts barding, snagging on a gorse-bush. The beast, rearing as a Tudor halberdier lunges his blade, grazing your pauldron in a shower of sparks. Your counterstroke fells him, the halberd clattering, but the tide turns treacherous. From the hollows, Stanley's 5,000 eruptor bolt from the blue, their eagle banners blooming like vipers. William, the elder, had hedged his bet with Richard's gold, but whispered oaths to Henry at Now, his billmen slam into the Yorkist rear, axes biting through harness joints, daggers plunging into visor gaps. Richard sees the perfidy, his face contorting in rage's mask. Treason, loyalty binds you, he bellows, spurring blank Sanglier toward Henry's knot. 500 Bornites in his waker, forlorn hope, desperate and divine. The charger plunges into the melee hooves, pulping a Stanley archer, Richard's sword rising wet. He fells Sir Robert Harrington, the knight's plume, shearing away, then wheels to parry a Welshman's falchion. But the crowned St. Edward's, borne by the loyal Sir Percival Thirlwall, on a velvet cushion slips from the scrum, trampled into the mire by iron-shod destriers. Isolated, unhorsed by a bill's hook, Richard fights afoot in the press. His blade, a whirlwind of fury. 3 Tudors crumple before him, their blood anoint his boots. I will not fly, he gasps, visor wrenched open, sweat carving channels in the grime. A Welsh spearman, Rhys ap Thomas, lunges. Richard parries, but Stanley's own mace descends from behind, pulping the king's helm in a crack of thunder. He falls, the boar silenced, his body stripped and hacked, his naked form slung over a hackney. Displayed at Leicester's gates, the white rose crushed beneath. Henry claims the field. The heath, a tapestry of ruin, 4,000 Yorkists dead, their white badges muddied. The Tudors' losses light, buoyed by Stanley's knife in the dark. At Bosworth, the roses wither red, enfolding white in Union's crimson. Henry, knighted on the morrow amid the graves, rides to London, the dragon coiling around the red rose in his new device, crowned Henry VII at Westminster on October 30th. He weds Elizabeth of York in January, binding wounds with a Woodville bride. Their son Arthur, a bridge over blood's chasm. Yet the Thorns persist. Pretenders like Lambert, Simnel, and Perkin Warbeck haunt the throne. Perkin hanged at Tyburn in 1499, his York blood a forgery. Henry rules with ledger's eye, his star chamber grinding traitors. His daughter Margaret wedding Scotland's James to weave a greater web. The War of the Roses fades into chronicle and song Chaucer's airs, penning verses of beauty's bloom and betrayal's blight, but its echoes linger in the Tudor rose. A flower forged in fratricide, its petals veiling the thorns that crowned a dynasty anew.